Welcome to this explainer. If you're currently facing a return to office mandate and you're trying to figure out how on earth to balance that with a mental health condition or a chronic illness, well, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're going to take the complex guidelines of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, and translate them into plain, simple language. We want to give you the educational foundation you need to comfortably advocate for yourself. Just keep in mind up front, this is purely educational information, not legal advice, and having this knowledge doesn't guarantee that any specific accommodation will be approved. All right, let's jump right in. So let's just start by validating the very real tension you might be feeling right now. There's a massive amount of friction between a strict return to office mandate and trying to manage a genuine health condition. For a lot of folks, being in the office full-time isn't just an inconvenience, it's a literal barrier to their health and their ability to do their best work. It's a really tough spot to be in, but the good news is, there is a legally established path to seek support. We're going to demystify this whole daunting process by walking through 6 manageable steps today. First, RTO mandates and health. Second, sick notes versus ADA letters. Third, the anatomy of a strong letter. Fourth, who can write it? Fifth, the reality of the interactive process. And finally, taking the next step. Okay, Section 1, Return to Office Mandates and Health. The very first hurdle is understanding how the law actually views your request. To legally request an accommodation under the ADA, you have to initiate a formal conversation with your employer. This isn't just pulling your manager aside for a casual chat. It requires specific, formal documentation. That paperwork is essentially the key that unlocks what the law calls the interactive process, giving you a protected, structured way to ask for the remote work setup you need. Moving right along to Section 2, sick notes versus ADA letters, we really need to clear up one of the most common and honestly most damaging misconceptions out there. A standard doctor's note? Yeah, that simply will not work for a remote request. You know the exact kind, that little slip you get at urgent care saying you need 2 days off to sleep off the flu. That is completely different from an ADA accommodation letter. An ADA letter is a formal, detailed document written by a qualified healthcare provider, specifically designed to bridge the gap between your medical reality and your workplace environment. Which brings us to Section 3, Anatomy of a Strong Letter. So what exactly makes this document so robust? According to the EEOC, your documentation needs to hit 4 very specific marks so your employer grasps the entire picture. First, it has to describe the nature, severity, and duration of your impairment. Second, it must identify the major life activities it limits. Third, it needs to explain exactly how extensive those limitations are. And finally, and this is absolutely crucial, it has to substantiate exactly why working from home is the solution you need to perform your job. Now, here's a pretty surprising nuance for you. You actually do not need to disclose your private medical diagnosis code. Let me repeat that. A written diagnosis code is not legally required. However, your condition still has to be a genuine, clinically recognized disorder assessed by a qualified provider. Everyday workplace stress doesn't cut it. What truly matters to your employer are the functional limitations, basically what your condition makes difficult, and how remote work fixes that. To put that into perspective, let's look at a weak request versus a strong one. Saying I get headaches in the office is way too vague, but contrast that with the employee experiences anxiety symptoms meeting clinical criteria, with functional impairment substantially mitigated by a home environment. See the difference? They don't need your whole medical history, they just need to understand the functional impact on your daily work, framed professionally. So, a truly bulletproof ADA letter structurally follows these 6 exact elements. It establishes the provider's credentials, confirms an evaluation took place, describes the condition, outlines the functional limitations, recommends the accommodation, and sets a review timeline. And it does all this without ever violating your privacy by listing your specific medications or therapy details. All right, Section 4, who can write it? Knowing who can actually sign off on this is super important. It's a massive relief for a lot of people to learn that this isn't restricted just to your primary care doctor. The EEOC recognizes a really wide range of qualified professionals. For mental health, psychologists or licensed therapists are great. For physical conditions, physicians, nurses, or occupational therapists work. What matters is that they are qualified to assess your specific condition. This even includes telehealth psychologists authorized through PSY Pact, which is an amazing compact allowing psychologists to practice telehealth across 42 different states. Now for Section 5, the interactive process reality. It is time to ground ourselves in what actually happens once you hand over this paperwork. First up, let's talk timelines. Traditional in-person psychiatry can honestly have an agonizing 8 to 12-week waiting list, but specialized telehealth psychology evaluations, they can frequently deliver a letter within 24 to 48 hours after your consultation. When you're staring down an imminent return to office deadline, that kind of speed is a total game changer. As for cost, because these letters are considered administrative documentation for your workplace rather than actual medical treatment, health insurance usually does not cover them. If you get a standalone evaluation specifically for this, you can generally expect it to run between $150 and $400 out of pocket. We really need to manage expectations here and just be completely honest. A strong letter puts you in a highly credible, legally protected position to ask for what you need, but it just starts a good faith interactive process. It does not guarantee a yes. Your employer can still deny the request, ask for more functional information, or counter-propose something like a hybrid schedule. Ultimately, the final decision remains with your employer. Finally, Section 6, taking the next step. If you're ready to get an evaluation, how do you actually do it? Let's look at one specific pathway designed for this: Workwell. Now, to be super clear, Workwell is purely an administrative and scheduling platform. It is not a clinical practice itself. What it does is connect employees with PsyPact licensed psychologists via telehealth specifically for these ADA workplace accommodation evaluations. The process is really straightforward. You do a short intake, attend a 15-minute video consult, and if the provider determines it's clinically appropriate, you get your letter in 24 to 48 hours. A standard evaluation is $169 with a $299 option if you want employer follow-up support. But remember, the psychologist makes all clinical decisions entirely independently, including whether to issue the letter at all. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought. How does the modern workplace truly define productivity when an employee is left entirely unsupported? Stepping up and starting this interactive process is the absolute first step in self-advocacy. Because really, how can you perform at your best if you don't advocate for the environment your health actually requires? It's a tough conversation for sure, but having the right documentation empowers you to have it. Thanks so much for joining me today, and take care of yourselves out there.